Hey, are you starting acrylic paints and you don't know which brush to buy? Then this is the video for you. In today's video, we're going to talk about brushes for acrylic painting specifically. We're going to look at some beginner choices, go into some intermediate, and even talk about some advanced options. Let's talk brushes. Okay, beginners, I'm talking to you right now. You've never painted before. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what to get. Go to an arts and crafts store and get yourself a single brush. And this is the brush I want you to get. This is a brush I use during my paint nights, or if I do a paint party or something, and I have a lot of people painting and I need them, I don't want to have 20 million brushes for each person. This is the brush I use. This is a number 12. It does say acrylic paint, like made for acrylic paint. It tapers at the tip. It's a good size. There's a lot of bristles in it actually, so it can really fan out and cover quite a bit when it does a stroke. So beginners, you don't have to buy a pack of brushes. And I actually think it's a bit better to just buy a single brush at a time for what you need. So let's see this one in action, beginners, and I'll show you why this is so great. So I'm gonna wake it up by getting it wet. And don't forget to pinch it off or wipe off the excess water. We're just waking it up. You can even dab off on cloth. Okay. Let's grab some color. I'm gonna grab some of this liquid orange acrylic and we're just gonna go across. Now, if I wanna cover a lot of area, I can do that, depending on how much paint I put on my brush. If I want to draw a thin line, I can do that. If I want to make marks for texture, I can do that with this brush. Check that out, actually. It's pretty cool. I don't know if I've ever done that before, but I have used this brush for paint nights for a reason. Now, when I'm talking numbers and that kind of thing, obviously things can change depending on when you're watching this video. When I bought these, it was about $5. You can get coupons at some of these stores. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but $5 brush instead of buying like a $10 pack of brushes. This is going to be better. Buy one at a time, see how you like it, and also kind of what style you're going to be working with. If you're joining a class where you're going to be painting, the teacher's already going to give you supplies, like a list that you should get. But I love this brush for the masses. I think it's a really great brush for all the things that it can do. And watch, you can go from thin to thick lines. Needs to be a little more wet. Or thick to thin lines. You can make with this one nice pointed shapes, like if you're making a flower, that kind of thing. Because it has that tapered tip, it's a really fantastic brush just for a beginner. I personally don't use it that often for myself, but for a beginner, I think it's a really great brush. So if you're not looking to invest a lot of money, this is a really great one, and I love using it. My students have all enjoyed using it. Participants have enjoyed using it, so I'm happy with it. Next up, I would suggest a script liner brush. A script liner brush, let me see if I can bring it nice and close. Check it out. This is a 10/0. So this one here, and actually these are the same brand. What's cool about this one is it has long bristles. Not very many, so it can make really thin marks. So this brush is great. I would choose it as my second one so you can add a little more detail to your work, a little more refinement, and for signing your name. I use this one for signing my name and lots of detail work. So it's a great companion to this one because you can do some thin lines, but adding in some detail work. So let's get this one woken up. Let's get in the paint. Let's do some purple. Let's mix the purple with some of this orange. Because if I was painting with this brush first, here's a little extra. If I was painting with this brush first, maybe then I would go in with the detail over top with this brush here. So then I would mix maybe an orange with a bit of purple, or maybe a lot of purple. Depends what you're painting. I'm not really painting anything in particular right now, but maybe I'm going in and creating a line at the top of this, right? So maybe you're going in with that kind of detail. Or maybe up in here, you're going in and drawing in another layer, adding in, like I said, the detailing, different lines for contrasting and tones. It's a fantastic brush, really love it. It's in my brushes that I use, you know, must have list kind of thing. So one really cool thing with this one, now sometimes it's hard to do a long straight line with any brush. This brush can be a little bit, you know, you can do it. It can be a little challenging too though. What I do love though is if you're doing something organic like plants, trees, that kind of thing, where they need a little bit of motion, where they need a little bit of movement to it, and to give it kind of a natural looking flair. So if that makes sense, kind of like tree branches or veins, roots, it makes the marks really easily for that. So if you're adding in those details, it can really help. So let's say you're doing a leaf, you put on, let's say that's almost a leaf, then you're coming in and you're doing the veins with this brush, okay? So these pair well together. So if you started with this brush, you did some painting, you're like, I like this, bring in this brush, get some detailing in, step it up a notch. You're getting past beginner here. You're getting into more intermediate just with this brush, but learn this brush first. Don't overwhelm yourself, but also don't limit yourself to one brush for too long, because it's like if you stick to cheaper materials for too long, then because you're like, oh, I'm not quite, you know, professional enough. Well, by doing that, sometimes you're actually just like preventing yourself. You're limiting yourself to being able to show like greatness. So let's not limit ourselves in that way, but don't overwhelm yourself either. And I mean, that's not going to be a perfect formula for that. And maybe you have a talent that you didn't know about and it's just easy for you. Now, when I do lines, if you try and go over, here's just a little tip. If you try and go over your lines to redo them, it can be really tricky to get on the exact same mark. So just make sure you've loaded your brush well. So when you're going in to do kind of veiny type of work, that you don't have to go back in over top. If you do it carefully and start in an area where there's already a lot of pigment, that you have room to kind of go over top, and it's not going to, you know, don't start on the small side and then work your way to the thicker end of the work. Okay, so that is brush number 2, script liner, so beautiful. Oh, you know what? Let's do a signature so you can see how great it can be. Now this is actually pretty thick signature. However you do your sign. Okay, let's wash this brush and find out what I recommend next. Make sure you wash your brushes, that you don't leave paint in them. Wash them well. Sometimes you think they're clean and they still have paint in them, and then they can get ruined. So wash them well, pinch out the excess, and rest them flat to dry. Okay, next up, we're kind of gearing into the intermediate realm here, because you can do a lot with these brushes. But let me tell you, I'm gonna kind of go with how I went with my journey. A brush that I used, not this exact brush, but I used a flat square brush to paint a lot. A lot of my work has been done with this in my early years. Would I go back and change things? I mean, I don't live like that and with that kind of thought process, but it did serve me well. I like the control, I like the size. I'm not going too big here. This is a number 10 in that same kind of family. So looks like it's a 1/2 inch in width, and it's really thin, so I can make thin lines and big chunky line marks too. So let's wake this guy up and show you why I like this one. Let's add some white to this mix. I guess I want to keep some color though, so that I don't, so you can actually see the marks. And your marks will change depending on how much water you put into your paint as well. But for instance, you can make a nice kind of square marks like this. You can make nice thin line marks too. So I really like being able to have some of that control. This is a brush I used a lot. You don't have to just use it that way either. You can use it on its side and make kind of these like round types of marks. These kind of look like tulips or something. Okay, so there's different ways you can use your brush, and you can get a lot of life out of just being able to do these kinds of things, like try different swooping types of marks. Because it has that flat edge, you can kind of see it as like a calligraphy type of thing. Let's bring it nice and close for you to see. Okay. So this is one I used a lot. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the order I would suggest that you purchase these ones. Let's just kind of go over what I would recommend if you're an intermediate or kind of feel like you've used these kinds of brushes, you want some nicer brushes. One of my absolute favorite brushes to use. Now, this doesn't mean that this is going to be your favorite, but it's one of my favorites that is definitely in my must-have tool belt of brushes, and that's the angle brush. I have the 1/4 inch angle brush and the 3/4 inch angle brush, and these are fantastic brushes, and they do a lot of what this brush does, only some of it's easier. Some of it is better with this one, so I do think this is on my must-have list. So let's have a closer look. So here's the 3/4. You can see it gets pretty thin on its side, and it's quite wide, and it has a nice angle. Kind of like if you're painting the walls in your house and you're cutting first, you know how you paint the trim, and then you roll the wall. You use kind of a brush that has an angle, right? Sorry, we're zooming in and out. And then this one here gives you lots of control. If you want a brush with a lot of control, this is a good one. Look, I've left the price on it. It was $11 when I purchased it. I might even gotten on sale, but who knows? All right, let's see these guys in action. I'm gonna tell you a few things that I use them for. So this guy here, I use a lot when I'm doing detail work. So I'm gonna get some white, mix it in with this, maybe a bit of orange too. Okay, so what's great is I feel like I can do pretty good lines with this one, okay? I can do a pretty good straight line with this brush, and that's what I would use this for. Straight line, going in over top to create some detail. So if I needed a highlight on here, I could either use my script liner brush or this one. I could go in and make maybe more of these marks, although they don't look as nice as those ones, I think, but you can make lots of different kinds of marks. You can make rounded kind of leaf-like marks. You can turn it around and try and see what else it can do. Play around with it a little bit. Right? So I like this one for adding some details in where I want it to be maybe a bit thicker than the script liner brush. If I want to do a straight line, I can do that. So it has its place, and it's a great brush. I love it, and I use it a lot. Let's find out why I have a larger one. So when would this one be useful? So let's wash this guy out. And this one here, I love for painting the edge of my canvases because it's so great for control, and it's wider than this one. This one would take me much longer to try to do this. when this already covers that much space, right? Let's wet it and see it in action. Okay, so again, I can do nice straight lines. You can make the lines thicker and then thinner and then thicker. Like, this is a fantastic brush, okay? That just felt good, okay? It's nice and soft. It's really lovely. So I can make wide marks or thin marks. I can do similar things to what I was doing there. You know, you can make a shape and then fill it in. Of course, my brush was not quite wet enough. It wasn't loaded enough. That's why it made that mark. Okay, so you can play around and see how this brush could benefit you. Go in with some other color on top. Well, that's not really what I wanted. Let's just bring it on this side. Okay, so you can play around and see, but I use this a lot for that. So I'm not typically using this to cover a page like that. It's mostly, I definitely use this for the edges of my canvases. The water's looking so pretty. Okay, so a couple more brushes I want to show you that are kind of on my must-have list here, that I kind of my go-to, like something I'm going to use frequently. Okay, so I have here two kind of wider brushes. Here's a wider flat brush. Now this one is a bit wider at the top, so I'm not going to be using it for making thin lines across, but if I'm working on a larger canvas, I might want this for that reason, okay? So this one's great for covering your canvas, or if you like to have that square look and you're working in very, you know, kind of dramatic strokes that aren't as refined, kind of, you know, still strokes. Maybe they're very like a lot of movement, a lot of like impressionist looking stuff, like maybe even abstract where it's like playful and a lot of movement. Okay, so I'm gonna get this brush, we're gonna get some orange. And so if I'm doing a sky, I go back and forth with this brush and I can add in some other colors to make the sky more dynamic. And I can blend it in. Okay, and if I was working on a canvas, it would go right off the page and give me a nice section that's blended. The more you brush, the more it blends, okay? I know this is not meant for paint. Okay, let's watch this brush, and I want to show you another brush that is on for my intermediates here. Love this brush. You need to have this brush too. Have them all, but if you look at the ones that when we put them all together, you're gonna see that it's not that bad really. Okay, so take a look at this one here. This is an oval mop brush. Sometimes it has the name of it. This time it does. And so this is a 1-inch oval mop brush. You can see from this tip bit that it's fairly thin on the one side and then it widens out. And this one curves, whereas this one here was just very straight. These ones fan out more. So what I love about this one is, and mop brushes are fantastic to have for blending and creating like a bokeh effect with other colors and blending in your sky. So if you have your sky built up and then you want to kind of fan things out, I would usually apply my paint with another brush. Just gonna add some paint here. I'm gonna show you kind of what I mean. So if I take a canvas and I just kind of plop some paint down here and there, I'm gonna wash that out real quick. And then I take my oval brush, which hasn't been activated, woken up yet. Wake it up real quick. If it's a larger brush with more bristles, it takes a little more water to wake it up. Okay, just again, needs a second awakening. All right, then I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna softly brush, fan it like very, very lightly with this brush, move the paint, kind of sweep it in various directions to have this kind of soft effect depending on how you kind of use the brush. So I'll use this to create that kind of bokeh effect. And sometimes you can, like, you could leave in some of the texture so that it has these lines in it. You know, like feathers, fur, texture in the landscape, hair. And if your brush is even more, if it's rounded kind of mop, like this is an oval mop, if it's like a rounded mop, you can even kind of do more of that and have it even more blended. So they're a really fun brush to use. You can even sometimes use them dry and they work really well for this effect, but you can see how it created some really some interest anyways to this. My paper is getting too wet probably for this because it's a sketch pad. It's not a multimedia kind of mixed media pad. Okay, so that is that one, the oval mop. Yes. Do you use this brush? Let me know. This one's a great one to have. A couple more brushes that I would add to my repertoire if I had all of these and I was just looking to try something new would be some brushes that have stiff bristles. Whether that's a square or this rounded one, this one's great for creating texture. You can use it dry and just go in and create some texture. Right, so that added some texture in there. So you use it like a little stamper and create texture. You can use it wet as well. And wet would just be more like a regular kind of brush, but maybe give you a bit of the visible brush strokes. Okay, so this one I'd use mostly for texture. Okay, I'm trying to cover a larger space as well. Rather than just taking a tiny brush and making tiny little marks, you need to make larger marks, or more of the marks, not larger necessarily, but more of them. That works. Something like this too. So the stiff ones can be really great for texture. So getting a couple of those of different sizes or varieties, depending on what you like to paint, might be worth it. Let's just make sure we wash this brush real quick. Don't want to forget. And another brush I would say I like having is a fan brush. So having a fan brush is great for doing some of these repetitive marks. Let's wake it up. Let's get it some color. So a fan brush can do thin lines. It's not necessarily my go-to for thin lines, but check this out. I mean, pretty quickly I can throw in some lines here. And what I do love is, and its common use would be using it on its edge to create tree leaves and branches, especially if you're doing like evergreen trees. I need more paint. These are looking more deciduous than evergreen. Okay, let's make them more evergreen. So I guess you can do deciduous as well. Yeah, no, you definitely can. You can do different styles of trees. And so the fan brush is a fun one to have as well. So it's not at the top of my list, but it's definitely one that's kind of, see if you're doing a repetitive motion. If I was using a smaller brush, that would have taken me a lot longer. So it almost looks like a little feather. So how quick was that? And then you could go in maybe with your script liner brush. Oops, I got my page wet. some white maybe. And then go in and add a little detail on top of it. Adding those layers can make it look like it took longer. It's kind of a trick. It did take longer actually, but it makes it look more refined and a little bit harder to distinguish how it was created, and just more layers of interest, more movement, more life, all of that good stuff. So now I like that. Some things just evolve in your sketchbook, and that's what the sketchbook is for. If you just start with a few 5 to 10 brushes, you can really do some amazing things. And you can have a lot of fun with your art and have a lot more success when you buy something that is decent quality, not the lowest run-of-the-mill, but not the highest of the high either. You don't have to have that. Well, I hope this video was helpful to you and that you got some value from it and that you feel empowered to go out and add value to your work by purchasing a new brush or adding to your collection or recognizing that you already have what you need. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.